Hi guys, so this video is basically an intro to APIs and how they work. So what exactly is an API? An API is basically just a program that runs on a server that can serve as data. Now, generally, if we are trying to access a website called, for example, facebook.com, this is our browser, we're in Chrome, and we want to go to facebook.com. Then what we're going to do is we're going to send a request to the server for facebook.com. Okay, and that server is going to send us back basically some documents, some files like index.html, an HTML file probably, index.js, and index.css. But specifically from our JS document, we might want to get information from another server. That server may hold, for example, our profile or other information that we need to display in our document. So that's kind of where an API comes into play. An API is just a program that runs in another server. This wouldn't be facebook.com. More likely than not, it would just have an IP address like this. And to our JavaScript document, we would make a request. And that request would get sent to the server. And this server would not return HTML, JS, or CSS. It would really just return some data. So that data might be the name associated with our profile, our age, etc., etc. And that would usually be in the form of a string called a JSON string, or JavaScript object notation. And it might look something like this. So it might be like name, myth, age 22, I'm actually not 22, etc. So basically an API is just a program that allows us to access some data. Now, how more advanced applications work is pretty much like this. We'll have some JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and that all might be organized in react.js or angular.js. And that basically requests information for the application from a server whose address we don't know. All right. This gets loaded from some other website, and we kind of go about our day. So what we want to do is we want to build the API, and the API is just a program, api.py, that answers the request that's sent from index.js. So that's just a computer program that's running on this server right here, and that's what we're going to write today. This allows us to kind of work in this front-end, back-end model. Where our front-end code and our back-end code, our front-end resources and back-end resources are separated from each other. Anyways, that's an API. Today what we're going to do is we're going to use a framework, a Python framework called FastAPI. That's kind of similar to Flask to illustrate how APIs work. So let's get into the code. What we're going to do today is we're going to create this application. This is just an HTML file. And this HTML file is separate from the Python code that we're going to write. And this allows us to add employees, update employees, and delete employees to a list of employees. And again, this list of employees is not held in this HTML file. It's held in a server that is running on 127.0.0.1 8000. Actually, we're running this right here. And this is the code that powers our server. So for example, what we do is we can add employee. We can add an employee named, let's say Jason. His profession is a soldier. Create employee, and we've updated him right here. Okay, and that's actually getting stored in an array right here in our server called employees. And then if we want to update that employee, we can select Jason's ID. So his ID is 4. We'll change his position to general. He just got a promotion. Update that. And then that's reflected right here in our index.html. And this is all accessing an API, a Python file running on a server written using FastAPI. So let's kind of get into how that works now. So basically what we've got is we've got 3 files. We've got api.py, index.html, and index.js. Now, index.html and index.js I've already written, and that's what this is. Let's just go ahead and take a look at that code so we know what we're getting into. So if we look at index.html, we've basically got our labels, we've got our inputs right here, we have a form, and we have some buttons. And those buttons actually initiate a JavaScript function each time. Now, basically all the magic and accessing api.py happens in our JavaScript. And we're kind of always going to keep that open in another window here. And it'll kind of be clear why as we go through this tutorial. So right here, for example, we have a function called getEmployeeList. And that is called as soon as we load this JavaScript. We also have a function called updateEmployee. So for example, right here in our HTML, let me just put this right over here. In our HTML, when we have this updateEmployee form right here, when we click the button updateEmployee right here, then we are actually calling this function updateEmployee, and we're sending a request to our server at this address that then updates the information shown right up here. So I'm not really going to get too much into how this JavaScript is written. I will kind of give some details as to how it works because that is relevant to the API, but what I want to work on is the Python code that our JavaScript and HTML are accessing to make this all happen. All right, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at what it is that we need to do. So the first thing we want to do is we want to open up a terminal and we want to go ahead and run pip install FastAPI all, and that should be in quotation marks. So let's go ahead and do that. And it says requirement already satisfied because I have installed this before, but I just want to show this to you. And this not only installs all of the tools for FastAPI, but also the server program that will run our Python code. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and we can, let's just exit out of this just so that we can kind of have a clean state. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to say from FastAPI, import FastAPI. So we're basically importing the FastAPI object, and then we're creating app equals FastAPI, which is the main object that holds all of our functionality for our API. All right, let's see if I've got that. Okay. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and let's close this terminal out. We don't need that for right now. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and we can just start creating our API, which is super fast here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say app.get, and then we're just going to create a simple hello world function. All right. So we'll say async, and async means that this is an asynchronous function. So while this Python program is running at any time, this route and this function can be accessed and a response can be received. So we're going to say async.def hello world, and that's pretty much it. Now what we want to do is whenever someone accesses this route, and I'll show you what I mean by route in a second, we're going to return a message in the JSON format, which looks like this. So we'll say message and then hello world. All right. So that's actually it. Like that is all we need for now. Let's go ahead and let's run this. So let's open up our terminal. And what we're going to do is we're going to run the command uvicorn. And then we're going to write app. Well, actually, we're going to write API for the name of our file, and then app for the name of this object right here. Okay, and it looks like we've got another one running in a different window, so let's go ahead and close that out. Okay, we're going to close that out right there. And actually, we could run like multiple instances. It's just that we're trying to we're trying to run this in the same port, so that's why we have a conflict. So let's run that. Cool. Okay. So now, if we go to this address in our browser, and we'll say 127. It looks like we just froze right there. 127.168.1.1 0.0.1 8000. We're getting the same response right here in our browser. Okay. Now right here we wrote app.get because we are trying to get some information or get some resource. So whenever this is accessed, whatever program or whatever browser is trying to access this wants to get this message. Okay. So whenever we want to actually give the user or give another application some sort of data, we're going to use get, because that index.html or JS, or client as we call it, wants to get some information. So we're going to write a few more routes in order to, well, we're going to type a few more things in order to get our application working. First thing we want to do is we want to attach some data to our app instance. Now normally this would be done in the form of a database, but just for simplicity, we're going to create an array in memory. And this is just going to be kind of like this. We're just going to start out with name. This is going to be our record of employees. And it's kind of going to be written in JSON format. So I'll have name, a myth. We'll have an ID. 1. Well, that should be in quotation marks. Right there. And then we're also going to have position, and we'll say software engineer. All right, cool. Maybe we'll just add one more just to make things interesting. We'll have Aiden, an ID of 2, and position of teacher. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to write a route that allows the user to just get a list of employees. Okay. So we're going to say app.get. And then employees. And we're going to have another function, async def employees. And return app.state.employees. Okay. So whenever the user accesses this right here, they're going to get this. And in our JavaScript, we have this function right here that says get employee list. And notice it goes, it's axios.get, which corresponds to this right here. And we're accessing 127.0.0.1 8000 /employees, which is our handle or route right here. Okay. So that's how we get our employee list. And then next thing we want to do is we also want to allow the user to create employees. So that's this JavaScript function right here. Okay, so we're going to do app.put. We're using a put method, or making a put request, because we want this to only be done once. Okay, so anything that we want to only be done once, we're going to do app.put, and then we're going to access that using put and then the URL. Now, if there's some sort of error, or if something happens, we don't want this to be done twice, because that means we'd have 2 of the same employees created over again. So for example, maybe we try to insert an employee with the name John. And there's something that goes wrong when we're making this API request. And if we had a post, or if we had something instead of a put, then we would probably do that twice, and we'd get 2 Johns, or some kind of error would happen. So this is just to make sure that everything's good. So we're going to create a handle, create employee. And then we're going to say async def create employee. And here we're going to do something interesting. We're going to create not really an object, but kind of like an object that gives some specifications for what an employee should look like. And we'll create that right over here. All right. So we'll say employee has got to have three things. We also need to import something up here before we do that. So we're going to use a library that's included with FastAPI called Pydantic. And we're going to import a base model. So this is essentially actually a model. If you're familiar with the model view controller type framework, it's not exactly that. It's more just to make sure that we're following the conventions of whatever data that we want to enter. So let's say class employee base model. And then we can say name, string, ID, it's optional, but that should be an integer if we enter it. So we're specifying some fields that have to be entered, which notice match up to right here. So we'll have optional int. We also need to have, well, okay, that should be fine. I think we also need to import optional. So we'll say from typing optional. Import optional. And then we're going to have one last thing, which is going to be position. And that doesn't need to be filled in either. That's going to be optional as well. Optional string equals none. All right, cool. So basically the idea is that the user is going to enter some data that's going to conform to this format. And if you look at how we do this here, we have Axios put, and then we're inputting a name and position, all right? And our ID is going to be kind of updated right here. Now, before, like for example, before in a lot of other different places, we're actually kind of sending, we can send data in our URL. So for example, actually we haven't really done that right here, but we will when we delete some files. But right here, what we're doing is we're making a request using a request body. So we're making JavaScript requests. These are often called AJAX requests. Nowadays, they're called promises, which work slightly differently. They have a different syntax. So we're basically writing these promises, and we're sending this data that we want to go into Python right here. So going back up to this, we're sending a name and position from a form, from our HTML form, and we're going to get that. She noticed right here, well, we'll kind of get more into what this is. We're going to get that, and we want that data to conform to our employee model right here. And how we're going to do that is we're just going to say, well, first of all, we're going to get this employee. We're going to give it an ID. We're going to say employee ID equals len app.state.employees -1. And that needs to be just to give every new employee an ID. And then we're going to say app.state.employees.append employee.dict. So basically, this would be given in JSON format based on what we've put in right here. And we're going to turn that into a dictionary, a Python dictionary, and add that to this array right up here. All right? And that's how that's done. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to update a given employee, given their ID. All right? So we're going to use a post request this time. Actually, to be honest, like most requests, actually almost all these requests are done using a post request by most programmers, but we're going to do it the right way. So we're going to have app.post update employee, and that's going down right here. And we're sending from our JavaScript and HTML 3 different parameters: an employee ID, the key for the field that we want to change, and the value that we want to input in there. So, for example, the key might be position, and the value might be janitor, if we want to change the position for a given employee. So we'll say data equals await. Actually, we need to create our function right here. We'll say async def update employee. And we're doing something significantly different. So right here, we just had like a model, a Pydantic model, and we just kind of got our data, and it was very simply handled because we were just entering data that conforms to this model. Now we're doing something slightly different, so we need to actually deal with a request object. And a request object is an object that is created when we send requests to the server using JavaScript or whatever it is from our front end, from our HTML or JavaScript, from our JavaScript really. And in order to get the data from a request object, in order to get this data, we need to say data equals await request.json. And await just means that we are going to wait until we get this data, which can take some time because this browser, this code could be running on a browser in Cambodia, and that request could be sent to a server holding this code in Jamaica. Okay? So we're going to wait for that to arrive, and when it does, we're going to store it in the data variable. And we also need to import request right here. So FastAPI request. So now that we've done that, what we can do is we can go ahead and we actually need to do a few things right here. So we're going to say employee ID equals int data employee ID. And this matches right up to this right here. All right. That's how we're going to get our employee, and then we're going to say key equals employee key. Data key, corresponding to this right here. And then value equals data value. And then we're going to look through all the employees in our app.state.employee. So we're going to say for employee and app.state.employees. Then we're going to check. We're going to find the one with the employee ID and set that. And if that's equal to the employee ID that we got here from here, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to set our employee key. So it could be employee profession equal to whatever value was given. And then we'll return the updated app.state.employees to our JavaScript to the browser that is making this request, to the client that's making this request. Okay. And all right, I think we're cool. Return can be used. Okay. All right. Why am I no longer in a function? Return can only be used within a function. Okay, I guess that's something to do with indents. So I'm going to go ahead and okay. Probably I just need to go ahead and so that works. Return. Ah, okay, I see what happened right here. That's one of the irritating things about Python. Probably we need to do that, and then we need to do this. Okay, cool. Now we've got that. We're going to say return app.state.employees. Okay, so we're basically making this request, and this is actually using a JavaScript library called Axios. You can see that in the HTML code, and you can kind of look that up and see how we got that. But now that we've done that, let's move on to actually just deleting an employee, which is the last thing that we need to do. And this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to make a request using what's called a query parameter. All right. And let me show you how that works in our JavaScript. So basically right here, we have this delete employee function that's being run in our HTML. And we're actually creating a URL. So we have delete employee, and then we're adding the employee onto the end. So we're actually making a request. We're actually adding the parameter for the employee ID we want to delete in the URL that we're using rather than in the request body like we have right here. So let's go ahead and let's give that a try. Well, we're going to write the code and then we'll give it a try. So right here we're going to have async def delete employee. And we're actually just going to take in just one parameter. It's not going to be a request object, and it's not going to be an employee, but just an employee ID. And we're going to make sure that that's an integer by setting the type int right here. Now that we've done that, we're kind of going to do some very similar code right to what we did right here. We're going to say for employee in app.state.employees, and then if the employee ID in like that we were finding through this loop matches what was entered from here, what was sent from the client, then we're going to do app.state.employees .remove, and we're going to remove that employee. And then we're just going to return app.state.employees. If nothing was removed, then we'll just return an empty object. Let's return none, which is something that we can do. All right, so that's all the code that we needed to write. Let's go ahead and let's do a few things. Let's actually open the terminal back up. Let's see if we need to. Let's run our command uvicorn. API being for this file, and then app being for the name of the object. Code. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just run that again. Okay, cool. Let's just go right here. Okay, so still working. But what we want to do actually is let's go ahead and open up our sidebar right here and show side panel. No, that's not the side panel we want. Let's go ahead and do this. And we want to go ahead and open this up, this index.html, all right? And this is totally separate from api.py. They're in the same folder, but there's not really any connection to them. Well, let's open up this code and let's see what's going on. So just to kind of give you an idea right here, we've got our forms, but we've also attached the index.js right here at the top, and then this Axios library. But what we want to do is we just want to open this index.js in a browser and just kind of see what happens. So let's see if we can open this with, can't really do that. Let's just go ahead and look at this in our Reveal and Finder. And then let's open this up in Chrome. All right, looks like we got this right here. We can't actually access anything yet. Let's go see why that's the case. Okay, so it says no access control or origin. So this is something interesting here. This is actually a security feature. This means that our server right here, our uvicorn server with our Python code, won't let just anyone access this server. The address that it's coming from, or the origin of the request, which is just this computer, the IP address of this computer right here, that needs to be whitelisted. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Actually, we're going to whitelist pretty much any origin. We're going to let anyone access this. We're going to make this particular API kind of promiscuous. And we'll say origins equals, we'll create an array, origins. And then we're going to use something called cores, a cores library. And cores corresponds to, I think it's like cross-origin request something. And let's go ahead and let's make those settings. We're going to import some middleware. Middleware just being like helper code. And this is something this is a concept that's present in pretty much every framework you'll use. FastAPI.middleware.cores, import cores middleware. And then we're going to say app.add middleware. It's a bit tedious, but got to be done. And then we'll say cores middleware. Allow origins equals origins. Allow methods. We're just kind of going to allow everything, honestly. And then allow headers. This is something that actually took me a while to figure out, but I mean, it's actually pretty simple and pretty straightforward. It shouldn't have taken me that long. And allow credentials equals true. This basically makes it completely open. If you are creating a production application, this is not what you should do. But just for like learning purposes, we're just going to kind of keep it as open as possible. All right. Okay, so that should allow us to do what we need to do. So let's go ahead and let's restart the server. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay, allow credentials. I spelled credentials wrong. Of course I did. Okay, cool. All right. Go ahead and give it another try. And oh my god, I'm terrible at spelling. All right, okay. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and refresh this right here, and you can see we got our data from our app.state.employees. Let's go ahead and see if we can add something. We'll add John, who is a plumber. And it looked like that didn't work. Let's see, you might have some kind of error right here. Ah, okay, I know why. So right here in our JavaScript, every time we send a request, we're getting a response back. So we're getting a response back with the data in the return statements right here. Return app.state.employees, return app.state.employees, and that's what's being displayed right here. That's our response.data. And that's being stored in student list in our HTML. So that's what was getting stored right up here. All right. So what I didn't do right here is I didn't return anything. Right, so I need to return app.state.employees, or I need to return the newly modified version. So let's go ahead and let's do that. Let's go ahead and keep in mind whenever I'm starting and restarting the server, because this array is being stored in memory, it's just being refreshed and this is being put in. What we would do in a future tutorial is actually connect this up to a database, so that whenever I restart the server, that data is still there in the database. Let's go ahead and refresh this. We've got this again. We'll add John. Profession is a plumber. Add that there, and we've got that right there. We can update John, and we can say, oh, okay, look, actually his ID is the same. That's interesting. So probably we had an ID of 1, 2. We should probably like add 1 right here. That makes more sense. Let's fix that code, run that, add John again, plumber, cool. Now if I want to update him, let's say he got a promotion to a manager. Let's say 3 for his ID, profession, for the field we want to change, or position actually, position. And then we'll say, we'll change it to manager, update employee, and we've got that right there. And let's say John's going to drop off the face of the earth. We'll put his ID in here and then just delete it. And we're good to go. Now, one tool that I like to use that makes FastAPI really easy to use and powerful is the fact that you can actually go to, so this is basically, let me just actually refresh this. Okay, so also, I should probably just do this, but one useful thing you can do is you can just do reload, which just reloads every time there's a change that's been made. Anyways, so if we access this again, we have hello world, but what we can also do is we can access sort of a testing and display panel, and that looks like this. Docs. I guess it just takes a second to load. And right here we can basically see all the routes that we specified right here. And we can see, for example, right here we can see our schemas. And this is the schema for employee, which we created right up here. Now, the other awesome thing we can do is we can test each of our routes. So for example, right here, we can just click try it out, execute, and we can see the output from that route, which is just this. So this is our employees route where we just got all the employees. For example, right here, create employee, we can try it out. And basically we need to edit this, probably make this like 4. The name would be Jason, and then we'll just say, I don't know, priest. All right. We can go ahead and execute this. And we get a response, and we get our new app.state.employees. And this is a really powerful feature that makes this really versatile and really easy to use, along with reload, which I should have shown you guys in the beginning. Anyways, that kind of wraps it up for creating an API with FastAPI. All of this code will be available on GitHub. So if you're kind of confused about the HTML or the JavaScript, then you can go ahead and look at that code and kind of play around with it. But this stuff is actually like pretty standard. I think that this stuff we did with FastAPI is probably what would be the most useful in terms of creating your own APIs. So if this was useful to you and you found value in this, please consider liking and subscribing. Have a nice day.